questions in the Q&A and hands raised. And our policy right now, I know it might be frustrating, is that this is time for the board because we do have a full agenda ahead of us. But the nurses have said they're happy to answer questions. So if you do have a question, send it to the nurses, send it to the board. We'll do our best to get your answers. But we are going to move on with the agenda at this point. And I would just like to thank the nurses one more time for not just tonight and your amazing presentation that was full of information, but for all that you've been doing. You've just been hitting it out of the park. You're amazing. So thank you for keeping us all safe. Super appreciated. Moving on to principal report. We will start with Jason Mangiarinis, our Pond Cove principal.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. And good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So actually, Kathy and Troy and myself kind of have worked together on a presentation. And I'm thinking, Kathy, that this is the appropriate time. So Heather, if we could, Troy and I both plan to speak about our schools, but as part of a data presentation with Kathy. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and go first. I'll share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, so you came in and out for a minute there, Jason. Is it you, Troy, and Kathy speaking?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay, so can everybody see my screen? Because I'm not able to see anybody anymore.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. See it. Good. Okay. So it has been, as we are all painfully aware, almost a year since instruction shifted as a result of the pandemic, and we are halfway through the current school year. So the two questions that we want to answer tonight, well, that we want to address tonight, how has the pandemic affected the learning of our students, and how can we optimize the learning for our students? So I want to start with the question, what does the NWEA data say? So as I think you're all aware, all of our students in grades 1 through 8 take the NWEA in the fall and the spring. And what this graph is showing, these two graphs are showing, is observed growth from the fall of 2019 to the fall of 2020 administrations, NWEA administrations, and the growth that was projected. Projected growth is based by looking at all of the students in a particular grade who have the same RIT score, and that's what you see depicted on the y-axis, and who have had the same amount of instructional time. And notably, the amount of instructional time was not adjusted for the pandemic. So this is the projected growth for students who took the NWEA in the fall of 2019. So looking at what we see here then, we have math and we have reading at Pond Cove, grades 2, 3, and 4. And in the case of math, we are seeing that the observed growth is not what the growth was projected to be. And the same is true in reading as well. Now, to know whether this is significant or not, we have to compare this data to prior years. And that's what this graph is showing us, this set of graphs. So the first thing I want to mention is that these graphs are automatically generated by NWEA. And so the y-axis, we don't have any flexibility then. So the y-axis varies. So you just, when you're looking at the graph, you want to make sure that you're really only focused on the difference between observed growth and projected growth, because the intervals do vary from graph to graph. So having said that, the the blue bar is the observed growth, and the orange diamond is the projected growth. So let's start by looking at this year's second grade. They are slightly below where they were projected to be, but it is less than a point. You can see in prior years, projected growth was well within observed growth. There is a large gap for our third graders that might be a cause for concern. It may still be a cause for concern, but it's also worth noting that there is a gap every year for our third graders between observed growth and projected growth. In the fall, from fall 2017 to fall 2018, it was a 10-point gap. From fall 2018 to fall 2019, it was an 8-point gap. And then from fall 2019 to fall 2020, it was a 10-point gap. We believe that this gap is due to the fact that our first and second graders take the K2 test, while our third graders take the 2-5 test, the test for students in grades 2 through 5, and that the growth is projected based on that K2 test, not the 2-5 test, and that the 2-5 test is, even though it's an adaptive assessment, the 2-5 test is a harder test in that it's assessing more standards. It's assessing all the way up to 5th grade standards. So our students in the second grade in particular, our high performing students, they top out. And so that's why we see that, that there is often a gap between observed growth and projected growth in the third grade, but then it's typically made up in the 4th grade. And you see that, so like this year's 4th grade, in the second grade, so fall 2017 to fall 2018, when they were in the second grade, their observed growth exceeded their projected growth. And then the following year, there was a gap between their observed growth and the projected growth. And then they've almost made that all the way up in the current year, even though what was being measured was 3 months of emergency remote learning followed by a summer slide, and they still got within a couple of points of their projected growth. Okay, so that's math. Then in terms of reading, so let's start with the 4th grade. So this year's 4th grade. So when they were in second grade, so fall 2017 to fall 2018, they were 1 point below their projected growth. In third grade, they were 6 points below. And at the start of this year, they were right where they were projected to be. This year's third grade is 3 points off their projected growth, but that's actually less than last year's third graders were off. So what I find notable in this graph is the performance of our second graders. Because in prior years, you can see that the gap, there's no gap last year, and then the year before, it's a very small gap. And we think that may reflect the fact that in kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade, the students are still learning to read rather than reading to learn, as we say of students in grades 3 and above. It's a skill, reading, that has to be explicitly taught for most students. And the students who are currently in the 2nd grade entered the period of emergency remote learning 2/3 of the way through 1st grade. And so what we want to see when the 2nd graders take the NWA in the spring is some of that gap made up. That's what we are, that unfinished learning finish, that is what we are working toward. Okay, so now let's look at the middle school. Again, blue is our observed growth and orange is our projected growth. I think the first thing that jumps out at me when I look at this is that observed growth is below projected growth in math at every grade level. While in reading, the observed growth is higher than projected growth except in the 7th grade where the difference is arguably negligible. It's about a quarter to half a RIT point. So again, we want to see whether this pattern is evident in prior years. So I'm going to start with reading. So again, notice that the intervals on the y-axis differ from year to year. So we want to focus on observed growth versus projected growth. The current 5th, 6th, and 8th graders, as you can see, have exceeded their projected growth. And the 6th and 8th graders have actually improved their performance from the prior year. So this year's 8th graders, when they were in 7th grade, their projected growth was higher than their observed growth. Now they're even, and the same thing is true for the 6th graders. They were slightly below projected growth when they were in the 5th grade, and now again, those are even. The 7th graders are slightly below projected growth, but that's true in prior years as well, and it gets made up in the 8th grade. Okay, so yeah, that was true from last year to this year. Okay, then in terms of math, so in math, the story that the NWEA data appears to be telling us appears very different. As mentioned, observed growth is below projected growth in all 4 grades. The drop in the 6th grade year is normal based on prior years. And as with that switch in tests from the 2nd to the 3rd grade, this also reflects the fact that in the 6th grade, students are taking the 6+ test for the first time. And again, that gap is generally made up. The drop in the 5th and the 7th grade is not normal. And then when we look at this year's 6th to 7th and 7th to 8th compared to prior years, it's hard not to see the effect of the pandemic. For example, if you look at the 6th grade in the fall of 2017 to fall of 2018, they were below projected growth, but then when they were in the 7th grade, observed growth shot up. And the same thing was true moving from 7th to 8th, but not this year. So the question is, why might this be the case in math and not reading? An article I read recently that I linked at the end of this presentation speculates that there are a couple of reasons, because this phenomenon is not just true of Cape Elizabeth, it's being observed throughout the nation. So one thing, as with learning to read, math is almost always formally learned in school. People don't wake up and all of a sudden one day know how to multiply fractions. That's something that has to be taught explicitly to them. Often students experience math anxiety, and the broader stress and trauma that we're all experiencing as a result of the pandemic might be exacerbating that. And then finally, it may be harder for teachers to challenge students, to engage them in effective instructional practices via remote platforms in math. So reflecting on this data, we can go in one of 2 directions or in both directions at once. What are the reasons for us to be concerned about this data? And what are some reasons why we feel like we've got this? So in terms of reasons for concern, instruction is different. There's no question about that. We know we have less instructional time. And both principals will be speaking to that in a few minutes. In kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade, as has already been mentioned, students are still learning to read. That's a skill that, like math, has to be taught, and it's why our teachers at those grade levels are focusing on reading and writing and math. We anticipate unfinished learning in the content areas. We have been focusing on skills, and so there may be some content in science and social studies particularly that goes untaught this year, or at least not taught to mastery. And then we know that at this time when students are either learning 100% at home or partially at home, that this situation can be exacerbating inequities, and that everybody's home environment is different, and we're not able to equalize those environments in the way that we can when everyone is coming to school all of the time. So reasons why we maybe can take a deep breath and not freak out. So one thing is that NWA data that I showed, it measured unfinished learning. It was fall to fall. So it measured the unfinished learning from that emergency remote learning period, which is 3 months, and then the summer slide, and not current instruction. So we have been in a hybrid model, although some of our students are doing that 100% remote, but most of our students are in the hybrid situation. And so the spring data is going to be really telling. We'll be able to see, it'll give us a very good picture, I think, for next year for where they stand. And again, our teachers have been focusing on skills. Another thing I wanted to mention is that our middle school students took the NWA remotely. That was new for them. It's a different environment, could have impacted testing. And I had a teacher say to me, and the students, when they took it in the fall, they were out of practice. They had less stamina. And again, that might have impacted the results. Another reason why we got this, our teachers, they're highly skilled. They know how to differentiate. And as I mentioned, they're emphasizing skills, especially writing. There are teachers who've said that they're actually assigning more writing and getting better project, that the technology lends itself to that. Our curriculum is spiraled. Again, I think we have some teacher feedback that's going to address this, but students learn something in the 6th grade in science, they learn it again in the 7th grade and again in the 8th grade at a higher and deeper level, but it's an opportunity for teachers to address some of that unfinished learning. And then another comment that's been made is that the in-person classes are smaller and there are fewer classroom management issues, and with a smaller group of students can often move more quickly, more deeply through the curriculum. There's a reason why as a district we prioritize small class sizes, and so we're seeing the impact of that in this COVID environment in which we are instructing. Okay, I'm now going to defer to Principal Mangiarides and Principal Eastman.
Sure, thank you, Kathy. I'm hoping everyone can hear me clearly now. Okay, so again, thanks again, Kathy, for that, for providing that overview of the data. I just want to talk a little bit about the instructional changes that have taken place. As Kathy mentioned, this data measures particularly a year with 3 months of emergency learning and summer slide, given that it's fall data. And so we know that when emergency learning first took place and the weeks after that, it was all brand new. We were figuring out how to work together and do this. And there was much room for improvement when we ended the year in June. We had, it was really all spring practicing previously taught skills, trying our best. Our teachers just worked so hard. And by June, they were getting pretty good, but it was a steep learning curve. And so much fewer skills were introduced in the spring of 2020 than we would have liked. And since then, if we go to September 2021 to current, although we're definitely we want kids in school more and we want more FaceTime with kids, we acknowledge we're not providing the educational experience that we would like. Our staff just continues to work tirelessly, and Our teachers are amazing, and they're constantly focused on improving and providing more opportunities for our students. And I couldn't be more proud of the teachers and the students and the staff to see how far we've come. Again, so many thanking the technology department. Our teachers are well equipped now and can do a lot more, and they've had a lot of training on the various technology available to them. And we now have FaceTime, right, with the hybrid model, and students who are in fully remote have 4 days of direct contact via Zoom. So lots of improvements that make me very optimistic that we can really look forward to those spring NWA scores and our other assessments that we'll administer in the spring. So with that, I'm gonna talk more about Pond Cove in a minute, and specifically around kind of content that we're covering, but I'm gonna let Troy address this slide first.
All right, thank you. So pretty much exactly what Jason just said with, I think it was interesting going through this. It's really challenging to even think back and remember, the spring, because it's been a constant state of change. But at the middle school, we did maroon and gold days, but they were based on subjects. So it was math on a maroon day, it was language arts on a gold day, things like that. Our school day ended early. We were basically done by 12:30, and teachers were largely doing a lot of check-ins with kids. And I think it's really important to remember during that time, the pandemic was new to all of us. There was no pandemic fatigue going on, and I think we were all just doing our best to keep contact with kids and make sure they stayed connected with school. Going into this year, much different, and taking a lot of information from feedback and surveys and things like that. It was really clear for middle school kids, we want a lot of instruction, but at the same time, the fatigue of screen time on at home days, and it was a real big concern for many parents. So we built a schedule that would kind of support all of that. It's nice to have kids in person. We're able to make that face-to-face contact. A lot of our classrooms have between 8 and 10 kids in them. They max out at 12. But that really small class size and close contact has been beneficial. And now we're maroon and gold by cohorts by students, and we're able to offer full remote learning for students. I think one thing that was a priority for us has been keeping the integrity of our school and our schedule, and still valuing things like band, phys ed, health classes, all of those things. We're still working to value those and keep them in students' minds as supports. For some kids, that's a really important positive part of the day. And then kind of a new class really has been the social emotional learning. In some cases, that is a Zoom. And in some cases, it might be the newsletter that goes out. But it's a lot of effort being made to track and keep track of kids, and between teachers and counselors working with, oh, I'm not seeing this student show up at my Zooms, or this student, asked to speak with you. So there's a lot more going on in terms of that kind of support, I would say, this year as well. So Kathy, if you want to click us.
Okay, so I hope it's okay. Troy and I are kind of going back and forth here, but I think it's logical in the way it's presented. As far as feedback from teachers on how things are going, before I kind of share a little bit of that, just to give you a little background, if we go back to summer 2020. So in preparing for this school year, the 2020-21 school year, over the summer, all grade level teams, K through 4, worked on a revised curriculum scope and sequence. And so what I mean by that is for every content area, reading, writing, science, social studies, how much will they cover, in what order will they cover it, and also a timeline for when they will cover that material. So that's what I mean when I say scope and sequence and timeline. And so you need to remember, these teachers were doing this trying to anticipate an appropriate scope and sequence and timeline for a hybrid or fully remote program, which they had never experienced before. So but they were up to the task, and so they created that in the summer, and throughout the first, they've been monitoring that, and they discuss it at their team meetings and find out, have we covered what we thought we would? Are we behind? Are we doing well? Are we ahead? And so most recently, at the end of the first semester, and this goes back to last week, I asked teachers to really reflect on that, take some time and reflect on it, and jot their thoughts down about each content area: reading, writing, math, science, and social studies, and kind of assess um, where we are with that scope and sequence. And I think in some places, we found that we're doing better than we thought, and in some places where we are not covering quite as much as we had hoped. And I'll share a little bit of that. Um, but so if we go to the slide here, one thing that we've made clear upon COVID is that we're prioritizing writing and math, and that was from the beginning. And in the very beginning, we didn't know 100% for sure what that meant for social studies and science, but we knew that we were going to prioritize that scope and sequence and timeline. And we also knew that there would be bumps along the way that would prevent us from getting to some of those social studies and science concepts. And that has played out. It's been true. So in general, and I'm going to give you a couple just to show you the level of detail that these teachers are working within. It's very impressive. So in general, we're prioritizing reading, writing, and math, and all grade level teams reported that they will cover most or not all of the standards that they would cover in a typical year. Now, remember, right now we're just talking about coverage of material, right? And then the proof is in the pudding with assessments in the spring. But I mean, it's important that we think about what we're covering. So they're saying that they're on track to cover most, if not all, of the standards in reading, writing, and math. But fewer skills will be taught to mastery. And that just makes sense, right? We have less face time with kids, 2 days a week for hybrid. And although teachers are connecting with students 4 days a week fully remote, there are a lot of barriers to being a fully remote teacher and not having those students right in front of you. So I want to give you just a couple examples of reading, writing, and math from these teams that they gave me last week to show you the level of detail. So this is a comment from the grade 4 team as a whole for math. While we will not get to geometry standards and some of the more advanced measurement conversions, we will be covering all other math standards close to the extent we would in a regular year. So that's kind of the level of detail that we're working with. So when I see that, that's our goal. And we're going to be assessing as we get deeper into the spring, and we'll know what we haven't covered, and those 4th grade teachers will be able to communicate with 5th grade teachers at the middle school and tell them, this is what we've covered, this is what we've missed, and you'll need to introduce next year. So right now it's looking like we're talking about geometry, right? And again, I'm talking about coverage, not mastery, but it's really important. So another example, so this is kindergarten math. The only learning target we may not report out on is I can represent subtraction to 10. It is likely that we will not achieve the same level of mastery of many skills as in previous years. So they have a really good sense of they're prioritizing reading, writing, math. They're covering quite a bit. And within that, they're prioritizing what they want to teach to mastery. And I think they're doing a great job. I could go on for a long time about that. I'm just going to go to science. So science, most grade levels I've got the same examples as feedback from teachers. They're covering fewer topics in science or are not teaching topics to mastery. And we're not assessing science this year. We're exposing, you still go into classrooms and you see science experiments done in socially distant, safe ways, but they're not teaching to mastery. There just isn't the time. But the teachers, we're comfortable with what we prioritized. Social studies, again, lots of social studies exposure through literature, but direct instruction and assessment of standards is not a priority for us right now. We're going to continue to prioritize reading, writing, and math. And that's, as Kathy mentioned, reading, learning to read, with the assumption that that is, with the knowledge that that's more important right now, given the limited time we have with students. So I'm going to stop there.
All right, so what we have here, I did much of the same. I've been asking all my teachers, these are really from the content leaders or humanity teachers. And it's very much similar to Jason. I think some of the difference is we actually have blocks in the day for science, blocks in the day for social studies, built in equitably. So I believe we will still be covering the majority of our standards, maybe not quite to mastery or the level we would have, but that is the beauty of a spiraling curriculum. You introduce topics, which in the same, it would be very challenging to say every student had the same level of mastery in any school year. So I think there's going to be varying levels, especially during a pandemic. But really quickly, what the teachers are saying, I guess I can just read that because I'm not sure everybody can see it really well. But for example, the grade 6 humanities teachers, so language arts and social studies, although some lessons or activities have been modified or omitted due to time constraints, we don't feel that there will be any huge gaps in learning that would interfere with our students' ability to enter grade 7 English language arts or social studies courses. The beauty of humanities is that when students do an activity such as a DBQ, document-based questions is what that stands for, they are not only studying ancient civilizations, they're reading, writing, debating, and covering both ELA and social studies learning targets. So I think that kind of gets back to Kathy a while ago that said, kind of in the elementary school, they're learning to read. In the middle school, it's really reading to learn. And I think that does show some of the differences in that NWEA data that Kathy shared. This next one is from the science content leader. So asking across all grades just about science. While the number of topics covered will be fewer than during an ordinary school year, all students will have exposure to and instruction in science practices such as asking questions, defining problems, developing models, planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing, interpreting data, as well as engaging in arguments based on evidence. As the science curriculum is a spiral, with each grade level building off the previous year's learning, each grade level will report to the grade level above on which specific content areas were introduced versus covered. And I think that means to mastery by the end of 2021 school year. Science teachers in the 21-22 school year will adapt to meet the students where they are and provide additional background as necessary to continue their learning. So I think that's really good feedback. One teacher gave me the quote of, it's kind of like basketball. You're not going to go out in a game and start practicing your foul shots. Hopefully you've practiced them ahead of time. And then in the game is kind of your assessment for mastery a little bit. And that teacher's comment was, we are going to cover most and introduce most topics. What we're missing is some of the time for the guided practice to ensure the mastery. But students will not go into the next grade blind and having never heard of things. They may not have mastered them yet. So I thought that was really helpful. So thank you, Kathy.
Okay, great. So responses and next steps. And I know that is what we're all kind of concerned about, and parents and teachers and administrators. And so we've listed some things here, but I want to go back to, the level of detail that our teachers are, the attention to detail. We have lists of skills that we have covered and skills that we anticipate that we will cover for the rest of the year. And we will be using this information more than ever before. We'll be doing vertical planning in the spring. So typically at the end of a school year, there are teachers are talking to, or the beginning of the next school year, teachers are talking to the previous teachers are talking to next year's teachers about where their kids were at. But we're going to have to do a lot of that in the spring because We may not have covered everything, and students may not have mastered everything. So we're going to be really looking at profiles of students and what they know and need to learn next, and sharing those with next year's teachers. So we'll be spending more time doing that than typical. We're prioritizing essential skills to be taught that we just definitely think that given limited time, we're definitely not going to miss out on the opportunity to teach skills, and that's primarily reading, writing, math. We maintain an active student support team process. Teachers are running into challenges and are having difficulty moving students forward. They can have discussions with colleagues and learn new ways to intervene and help support students. Dreambox, the district has purchased Dreambox, which is a dynamic math resource, digital online resource. And so teachers are really using it. The report, the Dreambox report, shows that we're having a lot of success with having teachers find the time to have students utilize Dreambox. And it's basically practice math skills. As the students answer questions correctly, it gets more and more challenging. So it moves with the students, so it's differentiated. We're maintaining, to the best of our ability, in-person and remote tier 2 and 3 RTI support. So that's extra reading, reading and math support. Our permanent substitute that we have this year is really making a difference. The substitute knows the students, knows the teachers in the classes. And when a teacher is absent, there's a much more seamless transition when that sub covers. Because the sub is not becoming familiar. This permanent sub has worked, really knows the kids and knows the school. A proposed addition to a math interventionist for next year to the Pond Cove staff would help address some of the concerns that we may have in unfinished learning in math. Remote snow days is something else that the district is trying to so students continue learning even on a snow day. And I just think that could have some benefits for some students. Targeted social and emotional instruction, our second guidance counselor has been just such a gift. Lots of students and families need support right now. So it couldn't have been more timely to have that position begin, and an emphasis on vertical planning for next year. So what I mean by that is, at the end of this year, second grade teachers summarizing what they've taught and working with third grade teachers, so third grade teachers know where to start. I'm going to stop there.
Perfect. And mine are very similar to Jason's. We also have a student support team that is working, and that is typically a group of about 4 people that field kind of some concerns that teachers may have or parents may have for children that might need some more academic support. Typically, that work is then doled out to 2 of our interventionists. However, those 2 interventionists this year are teaching a combined 4 or 5 classes of regular classes. And that largely is to keep the class sizes down and to allow us to be back in person for the amount of days we are. So it's still there, still working. It's just, it's reduced a little bit. Allied arts programming, I feel like has been very important for us to maintain. I think that is some strong connections for kids. World language courses maintained. One thing that I believe CAPE is known for throughout the state, and I think it's for good reason, is our high quality world language courses. And I think that it would be a shame to just all of a sudden not be doing those to gain extra reading or extra math at this point. So I think it's important to keep the integrity of our programming across the board. We have added some new courses for grades 7 and 8. So I know, and I knew going into this, that if there was an opportunity to create a course, we should do it. And if it could be in addition to and support current learning. So right now it's planning for success courses, which really takes a lot of the language arts skills, presenting, writing, and really puts those kind of right on the spot and has kids working to demonstrate and apply their learning. All students, it's not required that all students take it, but it is an opportunity in this time when people are concerned about the amount of time their kids are having in school. That is another opportunity that we tried to build in where we could without causing undue stress on students. So that's kind of in families, that's where we are. We also have the SEL courses, and monthly newsletters have been really strong and well received. Jason has Dreambox. We, right off quick, purchased the Ascend math program, which is an online math program. It's not online, it's pre-recorded, but it's individualized. So really it's an attempt to help students to continue to develop their math skills. And with that, it really aligns nicely with our curriculum. So you can follow, I can tell you if students are on it, how long they spent on it, what their pre-assessment, where it put them at, what level. Regardless, if you're an Algebra 1 kid, maybe it's identified a gap back in adding fractions, so you might be working on that independently to support your math skills. We are now going to be making a move to require people to use it. In the beginning, I had it there for people to look at, and if they were interested in doing it, do it. However, I think now we realize there are going to be some gaps, and we feel like it's going to be in math. Reading happens daily across the board. So one thing for next year's budget is a proposed position for a 1-year interventionist, which would be heavy math. So it's my goal to have the most information we can about these kids, and they're going to get it through using the Ascend math program. And it's so trackable that we will be able to really identify where kids are at and what they need. So that's going to be a new thing starting next semester. Is in school during their WIN, we're going to request all kids and require them to do 30 minutes of Ascend to get them into that habit so we can track them. We are also for next year exploring, well, for the rest of this year, exploring the potential for a 3-hour guided study hall for some students that may really be struggling and need that help. And it would be, if you're a maroon student, it's potential it could happen on a gold day. So that's out there as a way we can try to add some supports for kids, and there'll be more information to come on that later. And I think the real key here is to provide, in addition to intervention for classes. So in addition to means if a student is a little bit behind in math, we're not going to pull them out of their math instruction to give them their supported math. We're going to have them go to the regular math class, and they may have to not attend an allied art or something, but they're going to get in addition to work, not in replacement of. I think that's really important. And then next year, we're looking at scheduling both double blocks for English, language arts, and math for next year. So to try to recapture some of that time. Thank you, Kathy.
Great, thanks. Our last slide is just some links to resources, some resources that we've assembled. In particular, I wanted to draw your attention to the last article, that students respond to adults' fixation on learning loss, which just provides a really interesting perspective on what we've been talking about. So, so a lot of information. We will post these slides to the website and invite anyone in the community with questions to contact any of us. We would be happy to speak in more depth or detail to any of the information that we shared. And of course, take questions from the board.
Are there any questions? Elizabeth.
First, I want to thank all three of you for that really, really useful and informative presentation. I know it was lengthy, but I really appreciated it. And I thank you for putting that time in to share that information with us. It's interesting, the last link that you referred to, Kathy, is sort of something I've been thinking about ever since you said, how has the pandemic affected the learning of our students? It's been rolling around in my mind because I think one thing I have noticed is that there are, maybe all of us, maybe some of us, but there is that fixation on the idea of learning loss, and then the whole, and I haven't read the article, maybe this isn't what it says, but the idea that a lot of our standards are sort of abstract constructs out there, and we get to make some definitions of our own, and we also get to kind of celebrate that our children hopefully have survived a pandemic and have learned some other things, and so kind of just readjust how we're thinking, because standards were created. They weren't given to us by some deity or something. They're arbitrary, and so I'm not I'm not suggesting that we ignore standards, that we, throw everything away, but just kind of this willingness to shift thinking a little bit. So I'm going to go read that article and see if it says what I'm thinking. And so thank you.
Cindy.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much. This was it was very informative presentation, and I appreciate all the effort that went into it and all the work you're doing. I do have a question. I like how you're working together as well, and shared what's happening at both Pond Cove and the middle school. I know you mentioned that Pond Cove students will be using a Dreambox math program, and at the middle school it's Ascend. So there are two different programs. Can you talk a little bit about are there similarities? What is the transition from using one program, one method to another like for those students? And are there any plans to, support rising fourth graders as they're, as they move into fifth grade and perhaps some different methods than what they've been used to?
So both programs are new to us this year. And honestly, although Dreambox is a K-8 program, I don't know about Ascend, whether it can start in the elementary school. Troy, maybe you know the answer to that question, but Jason and I were both familiar with Dreambox at the elementary school level, and Troy and Assistant Principal Maury were both familiar with Ascend at the middle school level. And we talked at the beginning of the year about whether we wanted to try to pick one, and then decided, since both were pilots, that we would try Dreambox at the elementary school and Ascend at the middle school, and then evaluate both programs and see which programs seem to work better for students. The plan is to continue with both programs in the respective schools next year. And so I think you make a really good point, Cindy, that we would want to make sure that our fourth graders entering the fifth grade, and so moving from Dreambox to Ascend, that they're prepared for that. But I also want to emphasize, though, that neither Dreambox nor Ascend, I mean, these are tools. This is not the curriculum. I mean, the standards haven't changed, and our fourth grade teachers are fully prepared to transition their students into the fifth grade to those fifth grade standards. So, but I don't know if I've fully addressed your question. Or
I just had one follow-up. And so when you're saying you're going to look at both of them, evaluate, assess them, do you have a timeline for that? Like, what period are you considering an assessment period? And are there certain criteria you're establishing to assess one against the other? Do you have a decision point in mind for that?
I think this is a really funky year. And so we all agreed that we wanted another year of quote unquote normal school, using these programs in a normal school year before we compare them. So that evaluative process will occur next year with an intent to make a decision one way or the other in terms of both programs in the following school year, so in the 22-23 school year.
Yeah, and I would add really quickly that Ascend is a K-12 program, and I know that it goes up to Trig. I'm not exactly as familiar with the lower end of it, but one of the reasons I was comfortable with Ascend, I'm not sure that Dreambox is as much, but Ascend can basically be a tutor. It is the tutor for somebody, so you're not going to have to go out and hire a math tutor. And it can be used as that. Students take a self-assessment as long as they do it without the help of somebody. It will place them relatively accurately where they're at. And if they spend their time watching the lessons that are prescribed for them specifically, and then they take the post-assessment, they can move on. And the trackability of Ascend is what is impressive. I've had parents say, oh, my son's been on it for this long, and I can actually see the amount of time they've been on it. I can see how much time they take on a lesson. Did they skip all the lessons and just go to the assessment? So we can see all of that level of detail, which for me, honestly, at Cape Elizabeth, a program like that wasn't needed as much in the past because a lot of our kids were really thriving kind of mathematically. There still was a need for it, but not totally for all students. And I feel like right now that prescription, that level of specificity around what standards kids have mastered and what ones they have not is really important as we start to go into the summer and into next year for placements and actually programming design and what do we need and where are those gaps. So that really is the rationale behind why I did that one. And I'm not familiar with Dreambox as much, but I know that's there. Oh, and students will have access to Ascend all summer as well. little plug there. So I think that's something that could be helpful.
Thanks, Troy. Kimberly, you can unmute.
Thank you. Thank all three of you. That was a great presentation, very thorough, and answered a lot of the questions I've had. And I appreciate also your forward thinkingness in requesting interventionist in the budget for next year. And I had a question for Kathy and a question for Troy. Kathy, looking at the third grade testing results, I felt initially alarmed. I think you had a plausible hypothesis, and I just was curious how certain we are that that is the reason for the dip in third grade, and making sure that we're not maybe missing something else. And Troy, I was curious, you mentioned double blocks for I think math and ELA for next year. And I was just curious where the time is coming from, if there's something else that's being impacted, and if so, what? Thank you.
I'll go first because I already know my answer. No, seriously, we have, again, that is a thought. In some ways, it may be a dream, but right now, the early planning stages, we currently have WIN for 5 days a week. There's an opportunity to take 2 WIN periods for language arts, 2 WIN periods for math, and still have 1 WIN period to be used, the way we typically do. Of course, there are hurdles with that because that's one of the only times band can meet, and we're on a 6-day rotation. So there are some other pieces that we have to put into this puzzle and make it work. But I think there's a real value in doing this. The other thing that could happen for language arts is maybe not the need for a double block because we have moved to the humanities approach. So the DBQ thing was a great example. And I know that most people may not know that, but it's document-based questioning. So students read a document, they have to pull from the information, they have to write a response. So that is a social studies skill, but it's being taught largely in a language art through the language arts standards. So those opportunities may just be increased for language arts, and math may be the double block target that we're hitting. Another really cool thing, and I'm sorry to prolong all this, but we have added some nice things during this pandemic. And one has been, we get rid of, not knowing the pandemic was coming, we canceled the 7-8 math class, which traditionally has been a very challenging math class, I think, throughout the whole district. And we were just planning to teach it, keep our groups heterogeneous largely, and add a few extra 8th grade standards so that students would not be, held back from joining Algebra 1. Obviously, that got thrown a loop a little bit, but Mr. Hogovic has worked with the math team, and now we're offering a 7+ for families, and 33 families have signed up for it. They are taking it on Wednesdays for an hour every Wednesday to get those extra standards in so that those students can still go to Algebra 1 next year. So there's a lot of creative things going on in our schools right now that I'm pretty proud of.
And in terms of your other question, that pattern of scores dropping from the 2nd to the 3rd grade because of the change from the K2 test to the 2-5 test, and then from 5th to 6th grade because of the change from the 2-5 test to the 6+ test, has been widely observed, and particularly in high performing school districts, because again, the students just top out in that last year of the assessment. So in the 2nd grade, in the 5th grade, And it's a pattern that's been observed to such an extent that it's actually taught in graduate level courses on the teaching of mathematics particularly. So the key is that made up? And we saw that in most years, not this year at the middle school, fall to fall, but we'll see what fall to spring data shows, but which I think we can attribute to the pandemic. But typically you do see it'll look like your sixth graders are failing and everybody gets alarmed, and then they take the test the next time they take the assessment, either in the spring of the sixth grade year or in the fall of the seventh grade. They're right where they should be. Same for spring of third and fall of fourth.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate both your responses, and I also appreciate and admire the nimbleness with which you're handling this year and making improvements as you go along. So thank you.
All right, moving on. Jeff. Oh.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna sort of cover the same topic, but I'm gonna cover a different topic first. I am not going to have the same kind of data analysis that you've heard from PonCoV in the middle school, primarily because the comparable assessment to the NWEA that we use is the PSAT, which we just administered last month and do not have results for yet. So if the board is interested in a comparable presentation about high school gaps and sort of looking at the specifics of those concerns, I'm hopeful that perhaps I could have it in time for the March meeting. It simply depends when the results come in. They'll probably come in either late February or early March sometime, based on their original timeline. So I will comment on gaps and thoughts and concerns, but they're a little bit more speculative and anecdotal than you've seen so far in terms of PonCoV in the middle school. But first, I'd like to address another issue, and that is our program of studies. Our goal was in a regular year to have the program of studies to you a week or two ago, and then have the board have the opportunity to review that program of studies this year. And I think if it wasn't, or this month, and if it wasn't for the pandemic, I think we would have made it. The reason we are delayed is a reason that we're excited about. And Kathy in particular has been putting in a lot of work on this project, and that is to make our program of studies more of a live document. So this year, when you see the document, you will see for every course name, the course name will be a link, and it will allow parents and families and obviously board members to click the link and go and see a syllabus that sort of outlines the course in a little bit more depth than we've been able to do in the past. And we've been making a lot of progress in pulling that together. I think we're still sort of a handful of courses short, but I definitely will be able to get it complete within the next week to 10 days or so, and be able to get you the program of studies in plenty of time. But I'm going to make a request, if the board would indulge me, if you'd be willing to say it's okay to go ahead with the course selection process, as long as I tell you all the changes you're going to see in the program of studies when you see the program of studies. And I just wanted to quickly summarize what those changes are for you. And the first one is, and this one is really not new, but we're trying to emphasize it even more, that in addition to the opportunity for students to go to the Portland Arts and Technology High School, we have also, last year we researched, and this year we began a partnership with the Westbrook Vocational Program. At one point we thought we were going to have 3 to 5 students going there. We actually only have a single Pioneer student. I'm hoping we're going to be in the 3 to 5 range next year. And basically students will have the opportunity to take, in Westbrook, courses that are not also offered at paths. In other words, if there's a course that's offered at paths, our students will need to go there. If it's not something offered at paths, then they would have an opportunity to take those programs at Westbrook. And they've got some really cool programs there. They've got firefighting, they've got EMT, training, they've got electricity, they've got commercial truck driving, trucker's license, which is what our one student who's involved at Westbrook is taking right now. And then they have criminal justice, and they've got a social services program as well. So the introduction of the program of studies, we'll be talking about that. And then towards the end of the program of studies, all of those courses, opportunities at Westbrook will be listed. So we're excited about that. We are offering a new course that will be called Music Technology. It's a course, actually, Mr. Wheeler, Rob Wheeler, who you saw earlier, introduced the All-State Students in Band. He has a master's degree actually in music technology. He has taught a course in music technology in previous schools. And we're going to take advantage of his expertise. And I think it'll be an interesting course because you don't need to necessarily have any expertise in any particular instrument to be able to participate in the music technology course. But it's basically exploring how music is created through technology, giving students actual experience with doing that, which in a level which is beyond GarageBand. There's other more sophisticated tools that they're going to be using than that. So we're excited about that. We're excited about a semester art offering that when you get the program of studies, you will see. It's called Celebrating Diversity Through the Arts. And it's going to be primarily taught by one of our visual arts teachers with a significant assist from Rob Wheeler, our music teacher. And basically the purpose of that is to take a deeper dive than we are able to do in our regular curriculum into art, the creation of art by people and artists of diverse backgrounds by race, diverse backgrounds by ethnicity. So they'll be looking at art created by Black artists and Latino artists and Native American artists and other groups as well. And it is going to be a collaboration. I suspect it will be, I think over the next couple of years, we'll see some other courses with that sort of bent or that sort of focus coming into the high school curriculum. And this is the first. This is our pilot course in that. So I think we're really excited about that. There are 2 changes we're making to encourage more students to take computer programming. One is that we are offering math credit for computer programming. We are encouraging students to take computer programming for math credit in addition to a regular math credit, one of our regular math courses as well. And the other thing we're doing, and I think I mentioned it to the board at a previous meeting, is we are experimenting with an off-lab computer programming experience / course for freshmen to take in the off-lab days when they're taking their physics lab classes otherwise. That will mean something to high school parents, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about it if folks have any questions about it, but that's 2 ways in which we're trying to expand an already expanding program. And the last thing that you'll see is that our architectural design class is explicitly being described as a CAD offered class. In other words, Mr. Ray will be teaching using the primary tool of CAD as his instructional vehicle, which I think will be a great shift. So that's program of studies. I'm thinking I'll just keep on going and then have questions at the end with, all right, so let me get into unfinished learning. We did do the PSATs for students in grades 10 and 11 in January, and I'm expecting we'll get results. And I just say again, I'd be happy to, as soon as I get at least 2 or 3 days after the results come in to do an analysis of the results, I'd be glad to present at either the March board meeting or whatever works best for the board. I've had lots of conversations with teachers in terms of sort of asking them anecdotally how much of the typical course content do they expect that they will cover based on the pace that they're setting this year by the time they get to the end of the year. And the answers vary a little bit depending on the course, depending on the level of the course, and depending on the grade level of the students. In general, I would say the courses that are being taught to students who are older they're covering a higher percentage, but the percentages I'm hearing are anywhere between 60 and 90%. And I think the mid-range is probably in the 65 to 80% range, roughly. Probably maybe 65 to 70%, 75% range. I would say that there is more sacrificing of course content, in other words, some knowledge issues, particularly where that knowledge or that course content, the stuff of the course, is not directly related to what's going to be coming in the next school year with the next course in sequence. I think everybody is going into a little bit less depth on topics that are less connected to what comes next. I will say the skills coverage is probably on the higher end of that 65 to 90%. So reading, writing, those sorts of things. Teachers certainly recognize that those are our graduation learning targets. Those are the key things that we want kids to be able to be learning constantly. So I will say, echoing what Jason and Troy said, is my hunch is that when we do get the data, the bigger concern will be, as it is in the other two schools, will be in math. Only because, as Kathy well explained, kids learn math in math class. To some extent, they can learn, particularly in physics, they can learn some math in physics class, but for the most part, that's their shot at learning math. Whereas reading and writing skills are more embedded across the curriculum. So my suspicion is that we will find, particularly among certain grades and certain levels of classes, a bigger gap in math, which is one of the reasons why I have also proposed through the budget a 1-year math science position to help us close that gap. The opportunities in the high school to close that gap are, and these are not set in stone, but the things that are topics that are, I think, are worth exploring is, number one, the possibility of doing a program before school begins for maybe a couple of weeks to do a sort of quick injection based on identified needs. I think there is another opportunity taking even better advantage of our achievement period, where we've identified students who are struggling. And I do suspect that the two grade levels that will be the most impacted next year in the high school will be the 9th grade and the 10th grade. That's just a hunch I have, and I would suspect that it's probably right. And the interesting thing about that, and I do not have a program to unfold to you today, but I only have the concept that the 9th grade and the 10th grade also happen to be the years that also have extra lab periods one semester of the year, and they have off lab days. So that creates an opportunity to add some additional exposure to math, particularly as it's embedded and integrated in science in the high school schedule without taking students out of anything else that's really important. So that's an interesting, I think, opportunity for us, and I think it's going to be more closely explored. I will say that we've had some kind of the math department and science teachers have already begun discussions with the 8th grade teachers. And we did hear, as Troy reported, and I think Kathy mentioned as well, that in some cases, the math teachers think they're doing pretty well in terms of coverage, there's less of a gap than they probably expected at the beginning of the year, largely because of the much smaller class sizes. So we'll keep our fingers crossed about that. I will say, in terms of, we've always tracked really carefully the students who are failing and getting low grades in classes. And what we are noticing is that there is not a significant difference this year compared to previous years. It's a fairly typical sort of students who need more support and more time and that sort of thing. So that's my report on that. And then I just had 2 other things I wanted to mention, and then if any questions that anybody has. First, I wanted to sort of fill in Joe's report about Model UN. I just wanted to share the names of three students who went to the Boston University Model UN, the virtual experience. And the 3 students who won prestigious awards were Sophia Toon, who won for Best Position Paper. And it's actually notable because it's a good accomplishment, but it's also notable because it's also the very first Model UN conference that she attended. So that was Sophia Toon. Ella Bryman also won a Best Position Paper for representing the United States in the United Nations Security Council. And lastly, junior Claire McDonald, in her first ever crisis committee, represented John Il-ho in the DPRK cabinet following the untimely simulated death of Kim Jong-il. And in typical Claire fashion, Ms. Oliver says she won Best Delegate Honors. So she was a student that Joey was referring to, got the Best Delegate Honors, which I think is the highest honor that you can get. And the last thing that I want to mention that I'm really excited about is our ventilation systems in the high school are already being upgraded. All this week, some of the newer unit ventilators in the high school are being retrofitted with UV light filters so that all the recirculated air that goes through the unit ventilators hit a UV light barrier, which science and engineering tells us is capable of killing coronavirus and other germs. Starting in mid-March or early to mid-March, we are going to have many older unit ventilators in the high school replaced with newer unit ventilators, which will have 2 systems for killing coronavirus and other germs. And one is that very same UV light system. And the other is the unit ventilators will be stronger and more powerful to begin with. And they're capable of handling MERV 13 filters, which are sort of the state-of-the-art quality of filter for filtering out germs and things. So we're really excited about that. And I'm super appreciative to the school board and to Marcy and to Donna, who worked really hard to put that together, and Perry, that proposal, and the school board for recognizing how important it is. So I think we're, as a district, spending roughly $600,000 on that ventilation upgrade. So it's a really, really important and valuable and much appreciated step. And that is my report.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there questions?